What rule? At your job exists because one idiot ruined it for everyone? Story 1. Donut extortion. Donut officer. So I have to tell you about the guy I used to work with in sales because every time I think about it, I still laugh. My boss, I'll call him Ray, he ran the whole floor, used to order 48 donuts every single Monday morning. We had exactly 40 people on staff, so the math worked out fine. Everyone got one, sometimes two if you got there early. It was this nice little tradition, honestly one of the few things people actually looked forward to at 8 a.m. on a Monday. Then this guy, I'll call him Marcus, joined the sales team. Marcus was the kind of salesman who could sell ice to a penguin, but had absolutely zero sense of when to stop pushing his luck. The first Monday he was there, he grabbed a donut. Fine. Second Monday, he grabbed two. Third Monday, I actually watched this happen. Grab 2 entire boxes, walk them out to the parking lot, and put them in the trunk of his car. 2 boxes. Out of 6 boxes total for 40 people. Somebody said something to him, one of the admin assistants, I think, and he just laughed it off. He said, and I quote as close as I can remember it, "It's free, there's no rule against it." Which technically, at that point, he was right. There wasn't a rule. There didn't need to be a rule, because nobody had ever been such a donut-hoarding menace before that anyone thought to write one. So Ray found out, I don't know if someone complained or if he just noticed the boxes running out by 8:15 every week, and he put up a sign, 1 donut per person. Simple enough, right? Wrong. This is where it gets genuinely unhinged. Marcus decided that since there was now an official rule, he was personally responsible for enforcing it. He appointed himself what people in the office started calling, only half-jokingly, the donut officer. He would stand near the break room table on Monday mornings and watch people. If he saw someone reach for a second donut, even someone who'd just come back because their first one had a bite taken out of it and fell on the floor, true story that happened to our receptionist, he would loudly call them out in front of everyone. "Hey, 1 per person, read the sign!" The same guy who had personally stuffed 2 boxes into his trunk 3 weeks earlier. People started dreading Monday mornings, not because of the work week starting, but because they didn't want to deal with Marcus hovering by the donuts like some kind of self-appointed pastry TSA agent. A couple of people stopped taking donuts altogether just to avoid the confrontation. Eventually enough people complained about the whole situation, not just Marcus, but the fact that there was now tension over free donuts of all things, that Ray just canceled the tradition entirely. No more Monday donuts, ever. The sign came down because there was nothing left to enforce. Marcus, by the way, did not seem to connect any of this to his own behavior. He acted like the whole office had just decided to be cheap all of a sudden. Honestly, looking back on it, what gets me isn't even the greed. People are greedy. That's not exactly breaking news. It's the sheer audacity of going from rule breaker to self-appointed rule enforcer in the span of about 2 weeks, with zero self-awareness in between. That's a special kind of person. We didn't lose donuts because donuts are expensive. We lost donuts because one guy couldn't just take his 1 donut and be a normal human being about it, and then couldn't just let other people have theirs in peace either. Anyway, that's not even the wildest office story I've got. Next up, I've got one about a coworker who managed to get an entire office's birthday celebrations canceled forever, over a card nobody was even forced to sign. Story 2. The birthday party that disappeared. Because of selfishness. My sister-in-law works in a mid-sized accounting firm, and she told me this story at a family dinner, and I made her repeat it because I genuinely could not believe it the first time. For years, this company had a really sweet system for birthdays. The company itself, not the employees, the actual business, would pay for a small cake, a $20 gift card, and a card that everyone in the department could sign on their way past the break room. Nobody was ever asked for money. Nobody was ever asked to contribute anything except maybe 30 seconds to write, "Happy birthday, hope you have a great one," in a card. It cost employees nothing. It was, by every reasonable definition, a nice thing the company did for its people. Then there was this one guy in her department, I'll call him Gary, because every office has a Gary, who apparently got it into his head that this whole thing was some kind of scheme, not the company doing something generous, a scheme. He went, and this is the part that still gets me, he went over multiple people's heads, all the way up to upper management, to file a complaint that employees were being forced to contribute money toward these birthday celebrations. Nobody had asked him for a dime. My sister-in-law was very clear about this part when she told me. Nobody had ever collected cash for these birthdays. Not once, not from Gary, not from anyone. The company paid for everything out of its own budget as a goodwill gesture. Gary had, as far as anyone could tell, simply assumed that because a card was being passed around, there must be some hidden financial obligation lurking underneath it, and rather than asking a single person about it, he skipped straight to filing a formal complaint with senior leadership. Now, here's the thing about companies and complaints like this. Nobody up top wants to deal with the actual nuance of, well, this complaint is factually incorrect. Let me look into it and clarify. That takes effort and time and a willingness to push back on an employee. It's much easier to just remove the entire thing that generated the complaint. So that's exactly what happened. Management reviewed it, decided the whole birthday program was more trouble than it was worth, and quietly ended it. No more cakes, no more gift cards, no more cards passed around the break room. All of it gone, because one guy couldn't be bothered to ask a single question before escalating a complaint about a problem that didn't exist. My sister-in-law said the worst part was that nobody in the department found out it was Gary until months later, when someone in HR let it slip during an unrelated conversation. By then, people had already mourned the loss of birthday cake for a while, genuinely confused about what had happened, before finding out it was over a complaint based on absolutely nothing. What strikes me about this one is how much damage a single wrong assumption can do when it's paired with someone who'd rather escalate than clarify. Gary didn't even benefit from what he did. He lost his own birthday celebrations too. It wasn't malicious exactly, just staggeringly lazy thinking dressed up as principal. He decided he was being wronged, and instead of checking, he acted on the assumption, and an entire department paid for it with him. Next up, I've got a story from a friend who teaches preschool about a rule involving water bottles that is somehow both completely reasonable and completely absurd at the same time. Charters? Story 3. The clear water bottle rule at the preschool. My friend Renata has taught preschool for almost a decade now, and she told me about this rule at her school that always makes new parents raise an eyebrow during orientation, so I asked her to explain the whole story behind it. Every teacher at her school is required to carry a completely clear, see-through water bottle at all times during work hours. Not tinted, not frosted plastic, not one of those insulated steel bottles you can't see into. Fully transparent so that at a glance anyone walking by can tell exactly what's inside it. When she first started at the school and got handed this rule during her onboarding, she assumed it was some kind of hydration wellness initiative, maybe tied to a health kick the district was pushing that year. She did not think much of it. The real story, as she eventually heard it from a teacher who'd been there for years, was a lot less wholesome. Apparently, before Renata's time, there was a teacher on staff who had a drinking problem serious enough that she was bringing alcohol into the classroom disguised in a regular opaque water bottle, sipping from it throughout the day while she was responsible for a room full of 3- and 4-year-olds. Someone eventually noticed the smell, or noticed her behavior changing over the course of a school day, and reported it. The school investigated and confirmed what was going on. Now, obviously, that's a serious situation. You cannot have someone impaired watching small children. That's not really up for debate. But instead of dealing with that one teacher directly, which they did, apparently, by letting her go, the administration also decided the underlying issue was that nobody could see what was in people's water bottles, as if the actual problem had been bottle transparency rather than, a person choosing to drink on the job around toddlers. So they rolled out a blanket policy. Every single teacher, all of them, completely uninvolved in the original incident, now has to carry a clear bottle so administrators and each other can visually confirm at any moment that everyone is just drinking water or juice or whatever normal beverage. Renata says it's mostly just mildly annoying at this point. You can't keep coffee warm in a stainless steel tumbler anymore. Everything has to go in these plastic bottles that sweat condensation all over your desk, and by the afternoon, your water tastes like plastic. But she also says every new teacher asks about it during their first week, and when the answer comes out, there's always this beat of stunned silence before someone says something like, "Wait, that's why." What gets me about this story, honestly, is how it's simultaneously the most understandable overreaction and the most useless one. I get the impulse. Something went wrong. Leadership wants to feel like they've done something to make sure it never happens again. But making everyone carry a see-through bottle doesn't actually stop a determined person from finding another way to sneak alcohol in if they really wanted to. It's a solution that looks like accountability without actually preventing the specific behavior it's supposedly aimed at. It just makes 40 innocent teachers a little more uncomfortable every day, forever, for something one person did once. Speaking of one person ruining things for a whole room full of people, my next story is about a birthday cake that turned into a full-blown act of war between one coworker and literally everyone else in the office. Story 4. The Birthday Cake Hijacker. Daisy. Okay, this next one is from my cousin, who works at a marketing agency downtown, and she brought this story up completely unprompted at Thanksgiving last year because apparently it's still a sore subject in her office group chat. There was a woman on her team. My cousin calls her Daisy, which is genuinely how she spells her own name, one of those creative spelling situations, and the whole department pitched in to buy Daisy a birthday cake. This was meant to be a shared thing. The idea was the cake would come out sometime around lunch, everyone would gather, sing the awkward office version of Happy Birthday, and share a slice each. Standard office birthday stuff? Nothing complicated. Except the cake got delivered early, around 8:15 in the morning, hours before anyone had planned to actually cut it. And Daisy, apparently unable to wait, cut into it immediately, alone, before a single other person in the office had even seen it. My cousin walked past the break room around 8:30 and there was already a noticeable slice missing from a cake that technically belonged, in spirit at least, to the entire department that had paid for it. Then it gets worse. By lunchtime, when everyone actually gathered to do the whole singing thing and grab a piece, the cake was gone. Not eaten, hidden. Daisy had physically taken it and shoved it into the very back of the office fridge, apparently hoping nobody would notice or bother looking for it. Someone did notice, obviously, because a missing birthday cake tends to get noticed. And when a coworker found it and pulled it back out to actually do the celebration everyone had planned, Daisy got upset. Genuinely upset, my cousin said, like offended. She reportedly said something along the lines of, "Why does everyone keep trying to eat my cake?" As if the department hadn't collectively paid for it as a gift to celebrate her. As if it had always been hers alone and everyone else was committing some kind of theft by wanting a slice at her own birthday party. The final insult, according to my cousin, was how the cutting itself went. Daisy ended up slicing everyone else's pieces paper thin, like comically, insultingly thin, barely a bite, while keeping well over half of the original cake for herself. And she didn't even eat it there. She wrapped it up and took it home, my cousin says, specifically to give to her husband. Nobody quite knew what to do with that. It wasn't really the kind of thing you could file a complaint about. It's a cake, it's not exactly HR material. But it left a genuinely weird taste in everyone's mouth, no pun intended, about a coworker who'd apparently forgotten, or never understood, that the entire point of a shared office birthday cake is that it's shared. What I find fascinating about this one is how it reveals something about a person that a normal workday never would. Nobody would have known Daisy had this territorial streak in her if not for a $30 grocery store sheet cake. It's such a small, low-stakes situation, and yet it exposed exactly how she thinks about generosity directed at her, as something to be hoarded rather than received graciously. People still bring it up in that office, apparently, half joking, whenever anyone's birthday comes around. All right. Next up is one about two employees who took a generous manager's trust and stretched it so far it snapped completely. This one still makes me laugh every time I think about it. Story 5. The skip work, leave early, loophole. Fails, a guy I used to golf with, Dennis, told me this one from his time managing a small logistics office. And it's one of those stories where you can see the exact moment things went from reasonable to absolutely not. Dennis had two employees under him, both fairly new, both doing decent work, and he wanted to build a little trust with them. So he made them an offer. On days when he wasn't physically in the office, he traveled a fair amount for regional meetings. They could leave about an hour early, as long as everything on their plate was done. It wasn't a written policy, nothing official, just a manager extending a little goodwill to two employees he liked and trusted. The kind of thing a decent boss does to make a workplace feel less rigid. For a while, it worked fine. Dennis would be out of the office maybe once a week for a meeting across town. They'd wrap up an hour early and everyone was happy. Nobody abused it, at least not noticeably, and Dennis figured it was a low-cost way to keep morale up. Then Dennis had to attend a multi-day conference out of state. I think it was 4 or 5 days, something like that. Before he left, as far as he remembers, he never actually clarified whether the leave an hour early arrangement was meant to scale up to an entire week of him being gone. In his head, the whole point had always been tied to specific single days he happened to be out, not an open invitation to treat his absence as a green light for however long it lasted. But he also admits he never explicitly said, this doesn't apply to the whole week. So there was room for confusion, or at least room for two guys who wanted to believe there was room for confusion. Whatever the two of them told themselves, they took it as a full week off. Not leave an hour early. Off. As in, they simply didn't come in. For the entire time Dennis was gone, both of their desks sat completely empty. No calls, no explanation to anyone else in the building, nothing. The regional director happened to walk through that office on one of those days, completely unrelated to Dennis's arrangement, just doing a routine site visit, and found two desks that were supposed to be staffed sitting totally vacant with no one able to explain where the employees were. That went about as well as you'd expect. By the time Dennis got back from his conference, there was already a mess waiting for him. Questions from above about why his two direct reports had apparently vanished for days, and very little sympathy for, well, I sort of implied they could leave early sometimes. The unwritten early dismissal arrangement disappeared immediately and permanently. Dennis said he felt almost as embarrassed as he was angry, because he'd been the one to create the loophole in the first place, even if he never intended it to be driven straight through like that. What gets me about this story is the sheer scale of the miscalculation. Stretching, leave an hour early on days he's out, into don't show up for an entire week isn't really a misunderstanding, it's a gamble, betting that nobody senior would notice 2 empty desks for 5 straight days. It just happened to be the kind of gamble that blows up spectacularly and takes a nice informal perk down with it for good. Speaking of blown perks, my next story involves a company store account, a family's entire monthly groceries, and one new hire with absolutely no concept of boundaries. Story 6. Personal shopping on the company account. This one comes from a friend of mine, Alicia, who used to manage the break room supplies at a small manufacturing plant, and she tells this story with this specific kind of exhausted disbelief every time it comes up. The plant had an arrangement with a grocery store across the street, a running tab essentially that employees could use to pick up coffee, snacks, that kind of thing for the break room. It wasn't meant for personal groceries. It existed purely so whoever was on break room duty that week could run across the street, grab supplies, and have it billed directly to the company instead of dealing with reimbursements and receipts constantly. A new guy started. Alicia didn't remember his name when she told me this, or maybe just didn't want to say it, and somehow, within his first couple of weeks, figured out this tab existed and that the store would just charge whatever was rung up to the company account without asking too many questions about what exactly was being purchased or by whom. And instead of, say, grabbing an extra bag of chips for the break room, he apparently used it to do his family's entire monthly grocery run. Not once. She was very clear about that when she told the story. It wasn't a single slip-up, a moment of, oh, I grabbed the wrong card by accident. It was a full cart, groceries for his household, charged straight to the company for what looked like an entire month's worth of shopping. The store, to its credit, eventually flagged it, because the charges on that tab jumped dramatically compared to the usual coffee and snacks totals the plant normally ran up. Someone in accounting noticed the number 2 and started asking questions, and it didn't take long to trace it back to this one new employee's very obvious, very unsubtle shopping trip. Alicia said the guy didn't even seem to grasp why it was a problem when he got called in about it. His explanation, as far as she remembers it, was something like he figured the account was just for the plant, and he worked at the plant, so it felt fine to him. Which is a genuinely baffling piece of logic to apply to a running store tab clearly meant for shared office supplies, not personal groceries. Needless to say, that privilege got revoked immediately, for him and eventually for the whole break room. Alicia said management didn't trust the open tab system anymore after that, so they switched everything over to a reimbursement process instead, which meant more paperwork for everyone. All because one guy decided a shared coffee fund was basically a free household grocery budget for as long as nobody stopped him. What I find almost impressive about this one, in a horrifying way, is the confidence. It's one thing to sneak something small through a loophole hoping nobody notices. It's another thing entirely to run a full family grocery haul through a company account in plain view of a cashier who was ringing it up in real time, apparently just assuming nobody would ever check the receipts on the other end. That's not really an oversight. That's just a wild lack of self-awareness about how obvious that would be. All right, from groceries to something with a much higher price tag. Next up is the story of a company truck, a distracted employee, and a Porsche that never saw it coming. Story 7. The company truck and the Porsche. My uncle worked as a facilities technician for years, and this is probably his favorite work story to tell at family gatherings, mostly because he wasn't the one who caused it, which he makes sure to mention every single time. At his company, technicians who were on call had the option of taking a company truck home with them. The logic was simple. If something broke down overnight or on a weekend, whoever was on call could respond directly from home instead of having to first drive to the office, pick up a truck, and then drive back out to the site, wasting valuable response time. It was a practical, sensible system that had worked fine for years before this happened. One day, one of the on-call guys, my uncle never gave me a name, just called him this one idiot every time he told the story, was driving the company truck and decided to make a quick stop at a supermarket for something. Maybe lunch, maybe personal errands. It wasn't entirely clear. What is clear is that when he parked, He did not put the truck in park. He left it in neutral, or drive, something that meant the truck was not actually secured, and walked inside like everything was fine. The truck, being a large, heavy company vehicle with nothing holding it in place, began rolling. Slowly at first, presumably across the parking lot, completely unattended, until it rolled directly into a parked Porsche. Not a fender, not a compact car. A Porsche sitting in a parking lot minding its own business, and it got hit by an unmanned company truck that its own driver had wandered off and left in a rolling state. My uncle said the aftermath was about what you'd expect. A very expensive claim, a very embarrassed technician, and a company that suddenly had to explain to its insurance provider why one of its work trucks had rolled, driverless, into a luxury sports car in a grocery store parking lot. Beyond the money and the paperwork, though, the company also completely changed how the on-call truck privilege worked. Technicians could no longer just keep a truck at home ready to go the moment an emergency call came in. Instead, whenever there was an on-call emergency, they now had to drive to the company office first, sign out a truck properly, and then head to the site, adding about 45 minutes to every single emergency response from that point forward, permanently, for every technician who would ever work there afterward. My uncle said it drove everyone a little crazy for a while, because the whole point of the take-home truck system had been speed, getting someone to a broken pipe or a failed system faster in the middle of the night. Now every emergency started with an extra detour that existed purely because one guy couldn't be bothered to shift a truck into park before running into a store. What sticks with me about this story is how completely preventable the whole thing was. This wasn't some freak accident, some unavoidable mechanical failure. It was a single, incredibly basic step, putting a vehicle in park, that got skipped, and it ended up costing every single technician at that company 45 minutes of extra driving on every emergency call, indefinitely, because trust in the system evaporated the moment that truck rolled. Speaking of consequences that outlive the original mistake by a long shot, my next story is about a forestry department, a winding mountain road, and a rule against eating in company vehicles that came from a genuinely frightening close call. Story 8. No eating while driving. Because of a near-death experience. My neighbor Walt spent years working for a state forestry department, mostly doing field work out in pretty remote areas, and he told me about this rule once while we were both out doing yard work, in this very matter-of-fact tone that honestly made the story land even harder. The department issued a blanket rule at some point banning employees from eating or drinking anything, aside from maybe water, he wasn't entirely sure, while operating a department vehicle. Not just no messy meals, no snacks of any kind while the vehicle was in motion. Full stop. Walt said when he first started, before he knew the backstory, he thought it was a pretty petty rule, the kind of nitpicky corporate policy that exists just to make people's workday marginally more annoying for no real reason. Then he heard why it actually existed from a coworker who'd been there a lot longer than he had. Before Walt's time, there had been an employee driving one of the department's vehicles along a narrow mountain road that ran alongside a river, the kind of road with basically no shoulder, sharp turns, a steep drop on one side down toward the water. While driving that stretch, this employee was eating a bag of chips or some kind of snack, and at some point choked on it. Badly enough, apparently, that he lost control of the vehicle for those crucial seconds, and the vehicle went off the road and down into the river. Walt said the guy survived, thankfully, though he wasn't entirely sure of the full extent of what happened to him physically. But the department's response afterward was swift and absolute. Nobody would ever eat while driving a department vehicle again. On any road, under any circumstances, no exceptions. It didn't matter that most department vehicles spent most of their time on totally flat, wide, unremarkable roads nowhere near a cliff or a river. The rule applied everywhere permanently because the alternative, trying to write a rule that only applied to narrow roads next to rivers, would have required a level of case-by-case judgment nobody wanted to leave up to individual employees anymore. Walt said most people don't mind this one, honestly. Unlike some of the pettier rules he'd dealt with over the years. Choking behind the wheel is a genuinely dangerous scenario, and it's easy to see, once you know the story, exactly why leadership decided it wasn't worth the risk of it happening again. He said he still occasionally sees new hires get mildly annoyed about it during their first few weeks, grumbling about not being able to grab a quick bite between sites, right up until someone tells them about the guy in the river, at which point the complaining tends to stop pretty quickly. What strikes me about this one, compared to some of the sillier stories out there, is that this is actually a rule that makes complete sense once you know the full context, even though on its face it looks like corporate overreach. It's a good reminder that not every workplace rule that sounds excessive is actually born from pettiness. Sometimes it's born from something that could have ended a lot worse than it did, and the company decided a little inconvenience for everyone was a fair trade for never risking that again. Last one for today. This one's about a misunderstanding involving headphones, a visiting executive, and a wall of competing radio stations that somehow made everything louder instead of quieter. Dr. Iser. Story 9. The No to Headphones Rule. A former coworker of mine, Priya, worked at a mid-size insurance office for a while, and she told me about this rule during a coffee catch-up because I'd asked her, half joking, what the strangest office policy she'd ever dealt with was. She didn't even have to think about it. At her office, nobody was allowed to wear headphones. Not during calls, not during focused work, not even just quietly at your own desk trying to concentrate with a podcast on. It applied to everyone, across every department, all the time. Priya said when she started there, she assumed it must have been some kind of customer service-related thing, maybe tied to needing to hear the phones ring or something practical like that. It wasn't. The actual origin, as she eventually heard it explained by someone who'd been there for years, was almost absurdly small in scope. A senior executive, somebody fairly high up, visiting from another office or from corporate, had come by for a walkthrough one day. As he walked through the floor, he apparently noticed that a decent number of employees had headphones on and didn't look up or acknowledge him as he passed by their desks. And rather than assuming correctly that people with headphones on simply hadn't noticed a stranger walking by, or were mid-task and focused, he apparently took it as some kind of deliberate group snub, like the staff were collectively choosing to ignore him on purpose. He said something about it afterward up the chain, and the response from local management was to just ban headphones outright, office-wide, so that this specific executive or any executive after him would never again walk the floor and feel unacknowledged by employees with earbuds in. Here's the part that Priya said still makes her laugh, though. Instead of just leaving the office quiet, which would have at least made some kind of sense as a way to keep people engaged and attentive to their surroundings, management allowed employees to keep an FM radio playing at their own desks instead, presumably as some kind of compromise for morale. Except nobody coordinated this at all. So instead of one shared, agreed-upon station playing over a speaker system, you had probably 15 or 20 individual desk radios all tuned to completely different stations, all playing at once, all within earshot of each other across an open floor plan. Priya said the result was somehow louder and far more distracting than headphones had ever been. A genuine wall of competing music, talk radio, and static bleeding into each other from every direction, all day, every day. She said new hires would often ask, within their first hour on the floor, why on earth there wasn't just one shared speaker system instead of this chaos. And the answer always traced back to the same thing. A visiting executive who felt snubbed once, years earlier, over a completely ordinary and harmless piece of office equipment. What I love about this one is how it manages to solve absolutely nothing while making everything worse. The original problem wasn't even a real problem. Nobody was ignoring anyone on purpose. But the fix didn't even address the thing it was supposedly meant to fix. It just replaced quiet, personal focus with a genuinely chaotic soundscape that probably made people less attentive to their surroundings, not more. All right, one more for the road. My final story today is about a piece of popcorn that took down an entire 13-story office building, more than once. Story 10. Microwave popcorn, enemy of the 13-story building. This last one comes from a guy I used to carpool with, Andre, who worked in a 13-story office building downtown for a few years, handling something in compliance, if I remember right. He told me this story with this exact tone of weary resignation that only comes from having lived through something completely avoidable multiple times. Somewhere in the building, on one of the upper floors, there was a shared break room with a microwave, like most office buildings have. And at some point, someone, Andre never found out exactly who, or if it was even the same person each time, decided to make microwave popcorn and just walked away from it, or set the timer wrong, or didn't understand how quickly popcorn can go from almost done to on fire in a microwave. Whatever the exact mechanism was, the popcorn burned badly enough to set off the building's fire alarm system. Now, a false alarm from burnt popcorn happening once is annoying but understandable. These things happen in office buildings everywhere. Somebody misjudges a microwave timer and everyone has to stand outside for 20 minutes while it gets sorted out. But Andre said this happened 3 separate times within a single month. 3 full building evacuations, 13 floors worth of employees filing down stairwells and standing outside on the sidewalk, all triggered by burnt popcorn smoke setting off overly sensitive fire detectors within the span of about 4 weeks. Andre said by the second evacuation, people were already starting to get annoyed and joke bitterly about it in the elevator lines afterward, wondering out loud who kept doing this and whether they'd ever learn. By the third one, building management had clearly had enough, because shortly after that, an email went out to the entire building, all 13 floors, every single tenant company in it, announcing that microwave popcorn was now permanently banned from every break room and kitchen in the building. Not just discouraged, banned, with signage put up near every microwave listing it specifically by name, right alongside a fire extinguisher and an evacuation map. Andre said the wildest part to him was that popcorn is such a specific thing to single out and ban. Nobody banned burritos, or reheated fish, or any of the other classic microwave offenses that annoy coworkers in every office building on Earth. It was popcorn, specifically, named directly in an official building-wide policy, because whoever kept burning it had managed to do it 3 separate times in a month before anyone figured out how to stop them, or before they figured out how to stop themselves. He said even years later, when new tenants moved into the building, the popcorn ban sign was still one of the first things people noticed and asked about, usually assuming at first that it must be some kind of joke or leftover prank sign nobody had bothered to take down. It wasn't. It was a real, enforced building policy, purely because someone, or possibly several someones, couldn't be trusted to stand near a microwave for 2.5 minutes. What gets me about this one, more than almost any of the others, is the scale of the disruption versus the size of the mistake. Burning popcorn is such a small, dumb, universally relatable error, and yet it managed to evacuate a 13-story building 3 separate times before anyone in charge decided enough was enough. It's a good reminder that it's rarely the big, dramatic mistakes that create the most disruptive rules. Sometimes it really is just popcorn, 3 times in a row, that finally breaks people's patience for good.